My own mental health conditions started becoming really evident when I was exactly your age. I can be frank and tell you that my own mental health conditions are a result of a real party of a childhood, which wasn't apparent to anybody else around my family. Around us, people wouldn't have guessed, because in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up, nobody said, nobody would know, well, if a young girl has a lot of stomach issues, a lot of different things, that there were things that could point to abuse. And now you all have probably taken courses, or you're familiar with courses that you learn pretty early. How would you spot the signs of abuse of a child? Because that's something that you learn about. It's part of what may come up in the work that you do. So by the time I got to college, all of those coping strategies that worked really well for me and my brain and my psyche weren't working so well for me in college. And sometimes with post-traumatic stress, people will feel the experience of those emotions that they didn't feel when they were in that setting, because you can't survive. If you're over in Iraq, you can't start getting compounded with the feelings of all the different things that you're going to experience by being a soldier in the field. Likewise, when somebody who has a variety of things that can come up because of trauma in their childhood, you start to feel it once you can leave that situation, and you don't have to be so focused on surviving. Now, I don't tell you that because this is the Kerry show, but because statistically, a tremendous number of the people that we serve at the Department of Mental Health and who have mental health conditions also have some kind of traumatic experience in their lives. The numbers, I think, have changed for the greater, but 1 in 4 young women, or women, period, I shouldn't say young women, but 1 in 4 women has had a particularly sexually traumatizing experience. So the numbers and when I was studying and working on this even 10 or 15 years ago, the number for guys was 1 in 5. So, and there's a secret, right? Who ever hears about that? So the number of people that we serve in hospitals and programs that are living in the community, there's also this compounding factor that makes a difference in a person's mental health, which is really rampant, which is some level of trauma. Now, it could even be people who have lost their homes in the tornadoes, from this spring, who have lost things in floods. I mean, there's a variety. Trauma isn't limited to just, direct physical abuse, but there's a lot of other things where you lose control or you have to survive. And so I raise this because as you learn about people that you're going to serve in the future, that's something I hope you learn more about, because I think it informs DMH right now. There are 2 initiatives that we're really working on, and one of them is called trauma-informed care. People who come into DMH hospitals and who have had such an interruption in their lives that they're served by programs, they are some of those people that have a really high statistic. And even the results of having your life interrupted and being hospitalized, that hospitalization, that change in your life, that tremendous loss, there's a trauma in itself. So you start getting all these compounded factors, and there's a lot more going on. And you can understand too that, well, maybe that's why the statistics are actually much higher than we realize of people who have mental health conditions. And that's not a bad thing. Anybody know the definition of a normal person? That's okay. I like to say that the definition of a normal person is someone you don't know too well. And once you get to know somebody, you realize quirks or eccentricities or whatever you want to call it, and you think, there's a lot more OCD there than we're going to talk about. Or, is there a negative side to overachieving? And, that person really is ADHD and nobody ever identified it, or whatever the case may be. And one of the good things that's changed over history is, like, now we all see, of course this is based in the drug companies, but we have advertising now for all kinds of different medications, right? So you might see the ad for Lunestra and the person who's sleeping. There's this ad that I'm not too sure how I feel about it, where it's animated and the woman is walking around talking about her depression and how medication helped her for depression. And the depression is like this black cloud that follows her. You guys, you've seen this? And she goes to sits down at a picnic with her family. Things are groovy. And over beside her is this kind of ominous black cloud that settles into the grass beside her, like, ooh, the evil darkness is always right here. So I'm not sure how I feel about that portrayal, but there are huge statistics, and of course I don't know them because I don't always remember my numbers so well, and about people how prevalent depression is in our society. And for people to even admit to being depressed or to recognize depressed when I was your age was like, you didn't talk about it. So part of what I want to do is give you a little history context for our services and for the services of DMH. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the human rights structure at DMH. The more I work in this job, well, I should tell you that I've done this forever. That I went to college, and besides leaving college only one semester or 1 year shy of my degree because of my depression and different things that were happening. But at that time, there was nothing out there for people. And maybe you can find it helpful hearing a little bit about me or hearing about the history to know how much more is out there that's available for you or the other people you know. For those of you who are going into psychology or forensic psychology, you're going to learn about a really clinical part of it. But while you're here at DMH, even in the weeks that you've got left, you have an opportunity to learn about a little bit about real people and what's out there to serve people in Massachusetts right now. So to that end, I'll give you a little bit about the human rights structure. And sometimes I lose my train. But the track my train was on a minute ago is that people in the community, when they say, so Kerry, what is that job that you do? And I say, I work in human rights for people with disabilities. And it's like a big blank blackboard in front of them, like, what does that mean? Because you're putting the word rights with people with all these really negative labels. So people don't think, they don't pair those things together. And so they don't understand, like the mental health system sounds scary enough. You don't want to be there, right? Who wants to end up served by the mental health system? So that's scary enough, but what is this rights thing? But when you translate it into helping somebody asked me a question about their brother or family member that's getting served here and there, and then I can help them find some services, then they kind of get it. So I'm going to back up a little bit and give you some history that even just using my own time frame. Okay, so let's say I went to school in the 70s. I'm not ashamed of saying how old I am, really. But so I went to school in the 70s, and at that time, nobody, like I said, would have noticed or picked up on any cues that maybe something was going on with me, or would have recognized some of my coping strategies as not quite right. And there weren't community mental health services. So our services in Massachusetts and other places generally come out of some kind of lawsuit or civil legislation that happens on behalf of people with a kind of disability. So, and I'm really kind of giving this backwards, so you might want to edit this, Michelle. So in the 60s and 70s, we had nothing in the community. And what was normal back then was that if there was anything happening with your child or in your family, you either hid it if you were going to keep your person at home, or your doctor would tell you to have that person, to take that person to the institution nearest you because you're never going to be able to care for that child. So let's give a basic example of somebody with a pretty extreme hyperactivity disorder. which we don't even think of now as really like mental illness, like that can't be mentally ill. But if you picture a child who really couldn't contain their behavior, the parents would call that person uncontrollable. Nobody was going to give them a diagnosis of impulsivity or attention deficit or anything like that. They would just say, wow, Kerry is this really wild child. We can't do anything for her. She can't sit at a table. She can't eat. She can't keep a conversation. She can't stay in the room. She can't sleep at night. When you look at it kind of in isolation like that, without all the knowledge that we have now, it would not be uncommon for that family. Who do you go to? You go to your doctor. That's who everybody goes to. You go to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician would say, well, things aren't quite right with Kerry. And have you tried this and this and this? And they would say, you really need to send her to that special school. Well, that special school back then wasn't a school. It was a state school for people with mental retardation, because that was the general term. So if you didn't have, let's say, this child who's running around like crazy, all right, somebody else might say, well, there's something wrong with your child and you should take them to this state hospital. They're going to be able to change their behavior, or they're never going to change from this. They're never going to be improved, and you're never going to be able to take care of them. And so that child would end up growing up in an institutionalized environment with a lot of other people with a variety of things going on with them that can environmentally affect that child's behavior. So that may touch you now, because whether you yourself or other people you think like, oh my God, that would be awful. Why would that child or that adolescent need to be in a hospital? And that's because there wasn't the knowledge, there wasn't legislation, there wasn't protection, there weren't laws that protected people, and there weren't services in the community for people. So that was very normalized, okay? So if those are, I'm only going back as far as my own history, so you can guess that it was like that and much worse the farther back you go, okay? But even in the 60s, it would have been common that the family, let's say that child is really having a difficult time and tantruming and just all this kind of behavior that would be negative about the child. Maybe they even, they could have had autism or an autism spectrum disorder, which nobody was even talking about autism to the 70s. I mean, it just wasn't happening. So maybe that child is really sensitive to tactile stimuli, and their response is a very physical response to that. So back then and up until then, a person could simply drop their family member off. And that might sound heinous to you, but if you think about what options do people have, how do you help that person? That they could take to the doctor, and the doctor would say, or a nurse would say, well, we're gonna, we'll help you with this, but it means we're gonna take this person over here. And back then, the other thing that would happen often is people would say, this person's going to do better without seeing you for a while. They need to have an adjustment period. Or it may have been a normalized thing for that person to be told, you're never going to really do anything. You're not going to be able to change the life for this person. You just leave them with us. And that stigma, that fear, and that cultural, like, oh my God, sense of things was that people would hide it. Not everybody would stay involved with their family members. So the things that changed this situation were that in the 60s we have the world of civil rights, thank God, where we finally come around to the fact that people of other cultures, people of other colors shouldn't be discriminated against. 1964, that's really recent history. It might seem like a long time ago to you. I was 4 years old. To think that I had neighbors or people that I know that were, experiencing wild discrimination, it's a big thing. It's kind of mind-blowing. So if there were people that had mental health conditions, nobody was fighting for them back then. They were just going to be shut away. But out of the civil rights movement, out of people saying, this really isn't the way we're going to live, and how this is not human rights by any means. You eventually, in the 70s, start to get some action on behalf of people with disabilities. So